Well, thank you for joining us again as we continue to talk about the importance of the presidential election, which is taking place in just days. We try to bring you as much information as possible. Today, I am very excited to have Elie Mystal join us, who is a writer at The Nation. He has covered criminal justice for them for just about a year and was a reporter at Above the Law before that. And what we know and love, Elie, is the fact that you are a Harvard Law School grad and were up in our area for about 7 years. Is that right?
Cambridge represent. Yeah, I was never. Harvard was my first choice coming out of high school, and Harvard Law School was my first choice when I went to law school. I thought law school would be like college too, and it was a whole different experience.
Whole different ball game. Don't say that for all the kids right now that are over there at Harvard Law. But I wanted to get you on because a lot of your writings are so important right now. You're covering the justice system, you're covering politics, but a lot of what you write resonates with the everyday person. And so I wanted to bring you on just to kind of have you give us an overview of some of the things that you found, more particularly with the Trump campaign. What have you learned, or specifically what has stood out to you most kind of just in the last few weeks of this campaign?
I think the most, I guess, terrifying thing for me is the realization that the Republicans that I see don't have a plan to win the election. They have a plan to steal the election. If you look at, all these times that we should have seen a pivot from the Republican Party or from Republican senators kind of seeing that they're down in state after state after state, that hasn't happened. And at some level, the reason why that hasn't happened is that I think that they are confident that their courts, stacked with Republican judges at various state court levels, at various federal court levels, and now at the Supreme Court level, they feel like the courts are really going to hand the election to them. And what we've seen so far is just a number of cases concerning voting rights, concerning ballot access, and concerning absentee balloting or mail-in voting that have, 80-20 broken the Republican way again and again and again. And I think that is their actual electoral strategy, is not to win votes anymore. It's to have votes that are against them thrown out and cast aside.
What you just said, the fact that there's issues with, that they're fear-mongering, I guess, so to speak, or that there might be issues with the absentee ballots, or why even when you start talking about the court system, why that matters to the everyday voter.
So let me take everybody back to 2000, Bush v. Gore. What was that case about? And everybody remembers like, oh, the Supreme Court gave the election to. What was the actual case about? It was a Florida state Supreme Court case in the first instance, right? And the case involved the Florida recount. Should the Florida recount continue? Was the actual question presented to the court. The Florida State Supreme Court said, yes, of course, we should continue counting all of the recounting all of the ballots. That was appealed up to the United States Federal Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said 7-2 that the way that Florida was conducting its own recount was bad. But then 5-4, split directly on party lines, the Supreme Court said, and there is no constitutional way for Florida to recount its votes. And so the election, as of election night, has to stand. Well, the difference between 2000, when Bush v. Gore was decided, and 2020 is going to be that the case is going to involve whether or not the ballots have to be counted at all. Remember, for Florida, it was a recount. For 2020, we're going to have situations, I fear, where the Republicans are arguing that the mail-in ballots shouldn't be counted at all. They should stop counting the mail-in ballots, what have you. And the very serious and terrifying thing is that if Amy Coney Barrett ends up on the Supreme Court, as we now all assume that she will, that will make 3 Republican justices, Roberts, Chief Justice John Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, and now Amy Coney Barrett, 3 Republican justices who got their legal starts working on Bush v. Gore. All 3 of them were on the Bush v. Gore legal team for George W. Bush.
And they were on that team having to
Yeah.
do the recount, or in charge. They were at the top of the food chain when it came down to doing the recount for that election.
They were part of the legal arguments that said that Florida should be forced to stop its recount. And now these three people are going to be on the Supreme Court when they get a question about whether or not Wisconsin should be allowed to continue counting mail-in ballots, or whether Pennsylvania should be allowed to continue counting absentee ballots. That's the case they're going to decide, and the three of them, at least, have kind of prejudged that issue. And then you also have the other two conservatives, other three conservatives, sorry, Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch, who are kind of opponents of voting rights just on general principles.
You know, that's a headline that kind of went under the radar, right? When it came down to Amy Coney Barrett, because most people have been focused on what she's going to do in terms of, Obamacare, the ACA, healthcare, because that's so important. That vote comes up a couple of weeks after the election. But you just brought up a good point that three of the same judges that were a part of the recount could now potentially be a part of what, like you said, we are expecting to be sort of a mess, just because of all of the mail-in ballots. And maybe you can tell our viewers, what's the difference between 2000, the recount, versus now, to where they might not want to count it? What happened to where that can be a difference of opinion?
Well, the issue is going to be when this. So, okay, here's how an election actually works, right? You go in, you pull a lever, you write a thing down, you send it in, and then state board of election officials are supposed to start counting those votes. Now, depending on the state, they either can start counting mail-in ballots as soon as they get them, but in most states, they can't even start counting mail-in ballots until election night. So that's why the process is going to take some number of days, right? Now, every state is different in terms of when they are supposed to certify the election results. That's the Secretary of State, usually in your state, certifying that the election results have been tabulated, counted, and we have a winner, right? That election result certification date is different from each state, but in some states it's as early as a week after the election, right? So the fight's gonna be in 2020, once we get to the deadline for certification, if all the votes have not been counted by that point, which absolutely could be the case in some states, will the state Secretary of State certify the election before all the votes have been counted? If they do, your vote might not count, right? If they certify the election before they get around to counting your mail-in ballot, then that ballot won't count. And at that point, there will be a lawsuit. That lawsuit will percolate eventually all the way up to the Supreme Court. And that's the opportunity for the Supreme Court, the Republican side of the Supreme Court, to say that the certification of the state Secretary of State is the most important thing, not the actual counting of the votes. And that's going to be the liberal conservative divide on this. And that could absolutely happen in key states that affect not just the presidential election, but also some of these close Senate races that could determine the balance of power in the Senate for the next 2 years.
Right, because those races, are very important. We talk about the presidential election being so important, but the down ballot as well as important, right? Because it trickles down to our everyday kind of goings on in our communities, from the police departments, right, to the head of the educational system. The down ballots matter. Your senators matter.
If you want actual legislation passed, you have to control the Senate as well, because the Republicans have made it very clear that in a situation of divided government where one party controls the Senate and a different party controls the White House, nothing gets to happen. So if you actually want policies, well, then you're going to have to control not just the White House, but also the Senate. And some of these Senate races are going to be extremely close. North Carolina, South Carolina, these are going to be really close races. Montana could be close. Iowa could be close. And so not counting all of the ballots, if they are able to avoid counting all of the ballots, could be decisive in terms of overall all-party control of the Senate, which is why, and I've written about this, or I've talked about this online. I did a piece with The Root recently exactly about this, which is why I'm not super concerned that the Republicans are going to steal the presidential election, because I do believe that if Biden is ahead in 4 states, 5 states, 6 states, that's going to be too much of a lift for even the Republican-controlled Supreme Court to pull off. Remember, Florida in 2000 was decisive because Florida, that one state, determined the Electoral College winner. If we're in a situation in 2020 where there are 4 or 5 states that determine the Electoral College winner, that to change the outcome, you have to flip Florida and Pennsylvania and Michigan in order to change the results of the Electoral College. That's a heavy lift for the Republican Supreme Court. But could they flip the Senate by just changing one state? Absolutely. And so I'm a little bit more worried about that than I am about the presidential election.
You know, you're talking about 2000, but I'm going to go bring it closer to 2018. What happened down in Florida and in Georgia? I mean, you know, what happened in Georgia is, you know, was the recount, right? They did a recount.
I mean, they just stole that. Like, in Florida, like, Andrew Gillum lost a close election. In Georgia, they just took it from
Stacey Abrams. She should probably literally be the governor at this moment.
Yeah,
and Andrew Gillum, who
they mugged her.
Yes, they did. You know, Andrew Gillum kind of conceded early and then went back. But so to your point, you know, it is up to the states. And then, you know, the Secretary of State, who was also Republican, right, in Georgia, kind of made that call that, nope, this is what it is. Sorry, Stacey Abrams, you're out. This is going to be our governor. So you're right. I think it's state specific. And when you talk about those 5 states, you know, in 2016, President Trump won only by 77,000 votes across 5 states.
Across 3 states. And again, I'm not fear-mongering based on no evidence. We've had Supreme Court cases in the run-up to this election, including this week, where the court could have taken stances to make voting easier or harder. And in 80% of the time, the court has chosen to make elections harder, including this week in Alabama, overruling a decision that would have allowed people to vote curbside, which, you know, as a coronavirus protection, to kind of drive by, cast their vote curbside and drive off, thus limiting the amount of contact they would have to have. No, says our Supreme Court. You have to park your car, get out of your car, go into the enclosed indoor space and vote in person. Like, it's decisions like this have been happening for the past 3 or 4 months. The Supreme Court refuses generally to allow for ease of voting access despite the pandemic. So again, the court they're not being subtle, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The court is not trying to hide the ball on what it's trying to do to your vote. The only way to fight it really is to vote anyway, right? You have to stand in that long line. You have to be prepared to stand in that long line. You have to vote early if you can. You have to vote early in person if you can. Like, you have to do all of these things to try to protect your vote, because they're not being subtle about trying to take it away from you.
Yeah, I think in our region, well, Connecticut doesn't have early voting, but they did say they're going to ask you to wear a mask. They can't make you wear one, you know, but most importantly, just to go out and vote, and of course, vote the entire ballot, because your everyday freedoms and democracies depend on it. Now, let me just switch gears real quick, but kind of tie it into something.
Your listeners in Connecticut, like, don't think that Connecticut is a safe state. It's not like New York, where I live. It's not like California. It's not like Massachusetts. Connecticut it's not a swing state, but if people stay home, it will be, right? So Connecticut listeners especially, go vote. It's important.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. So when you talk about you were talking about the senators and how important it is, you know, and you're given if it's a Senate Republican and who has the House. And right now with the stimulus bill, I think we're watching this play out in real time, how the Senate Republicans are holding up the extra money. I shouldn't say holding up, but there's a dead wall between the Senate Republicans and Democrats there to get this next stimulus bill out, which many Americans need. I mean, yes, we're in the Northeast where it's pretty much a blue wave. Everyone has lost jobs around this country, and they need this extra stimulus package. So when you talk about voting in these senators, and right now the Republicans have the majority, it trickles down and affects the everyday worker.
I think you're right to say that Republicans are holding it up. Let's remember the Democratic-controlled House has passed a stimulus bill, the HEROES Act. It passed one in May. It passed a revised one in October. Like the Democratic House has a stimulus bill that is sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. I will go further. If Mitch McConnell would simply put the House bill up for a vote, it would pass. McConnell does not have enough Republican votes in the Senate to block this bill. There are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Republicans who would absolutely vote for the House Democratic stimulus bill as passed. It is McConnell and about 20 of his hardcore conservative Republicans who do not want that bill to come up for a vote, do not want to allow that bill to go through, do not want to allow democracy to take place. That is the holdup with the stimulus package. It's not that the Democrats haven't passed the bill. It's not that they haven't passed the bill that Republicans would vote for, but it's not the bill McConnell wants. And so he won't allow it to be argued, debated, and eventually voted on. Why does McConnell do this? Well, he wants something very specific that the House bill doesn't have. And it's not really about the money. It's not about the $1 trillion, $2.2 trillion versus $1.8 trillion. It's not about that. It's about something called liability protection. And I know that's a kind of legal jargony word, and I want to demystify it because it's super important. But bottom line is that in this coronavirus pandemic world, right now, businesses, whether they're a restaurant or a bar or your employer, have to take reasonable care to protect you from getting sick. That's not a special coronavirus law. That's just the general law. The businesses have to take reasonable care to protect the health and safety of their workers and customers. That's the law. McConnell wants to change the law. He wants to make it so that businesses for coronavirus are exempt if they get you sick. The way that he's doing it, there's a lot of legal jargon terms. He wants to make it not a state action, but a federal action, and to change the standard of negligence. He's doing a lot of legal tricks to get there. But the bottom line, where he's trying to get, is immunity for businesses who do not take reasonable care, do not enforce mask use, do not enforce social distancing, and then get people sick. He wants to make them immune from lawsuits from people who get sick or who lose loved ones because of the coronavirus. That is the holdup.
And I know in our region, Elie, what's important is where's the funding for the teachers? Just right here in Massachusetts, just the other day, Boston's entire school system decided to go back online. In New York City, they can't even get it together to figure out, how to fund some of the public school systems so that those kids every day can have the food and have the teachers be there safely. And I know Connecticut had an entire, reopening plan with Governor Lamont and that was focused on the public educational system. They need the money. And so,
I want to drill down into this Boston issue because it's what it shows is how important unions are, right? The reason why the Boston Teachers Union was able to basically force the system to go remote only so as to protect their own health is because of this issue of liability. If Mitch McConnell had his way, the city of Boston would have been protected from any liability suits from the teachers union had the city forced the teachers back to work and gotten all the teachers sick. So this liability issue permeates through our system. It is why a teachers union in Boston has the power to protect its members, its teachers, from coronavirus. It's because to this point, McConnell has lost.